Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we'll be talking about Chapter 16, Persuasion. This is taken from the Public Speaking Project. So, Persuasion starts out with a quote in our textbook by Franz Kafka. I would not read advertisements. I would spend all of my time wanting things, right? And so I thought this was such a great quote because, it really reminds me of my parents. They're 85 and 72, and I help them manage their iPhones. And so very often I go through and I look for the advertisements in their email inbox, and then I unsubscribe them from those places because I feel like so often they come to me and they say, "Oh, Ingrid, I think we need something at Macy's. I saw that, Bloomingdale's is having a sale, but actually at the end of the day, we don't need those things." So, right, everybody out there, or many people out there, are trying to persuade you to do something, buy something, have something. But it's really their agenda, and it's not necessarily something that we potentially need. And so in this chapter, we're going to learn how to create a persuasive speech, how to be that person that you want to convince someone to do something, and also to be an active listener, right? So when you hear a persuasive speech, understand these techniques, understand where they're coming from, and being able to think critically about whether it is truly that you want to accept their idea or goal or product. Let's go ahead and hop into it. We're going to be talking about here first, what is persuasive speaking? And then we'll talk about the functions of persuasive speeches, types of persuasive speeches, persuasive speech strategies, and choosing a persuasive speech topic. Let's go ahead and start. What is persuasive speaking? So the book talks about two different definitions in the introduction. It says, first, persuasion is the art of convincing others to give favorable attention to our point of view. This is researched by Osborne and Osborne in 1997 in their book on page 415. And so, right, people were trying to convince someone something else to what it is that we have in mind. And then the second definition that the book talks about is that there's an artfulness or skill required to persuade others. And that is certainly true. This chapter will talk more and more about what that skill is. Let's talk about the functions of persuasive speeches. The first one are speeches to convince. This is where the speaker seeks to establish agreement about a particular topic, influence or reinforce particular beliefs, attitudes, or values. We spoke about in this course what a belief is versus a value, and an attitude as well, right? And then there are also speeches to actuate or reinforce. So this is designed to motivate particular behaviors. So these are known as very often known as infomercials. That's an example where there's a call to action. So the speeches to convince are really just trying to change your idea about something. So if I was giving a speech about being pro-life or being pro-choice, that would fall into the category of speeches to convince. But if I was talking about a topic that was a speech to actuate or reinforce something, I would be convincing you to go ahead and either participate in a rally for pro-life or pro-choice, or I would encourage you to buy a certain mop on television, right? So I actually want you to go out and do something as opposed to just convincing your idea. And there are types of persuasive speeches here. So we're going to talk about all the different types. The definition here is the types persuasive speeches revolve around propositions that can be defended through the use of data and reasoning, right? We're going to talk about logic in this chapter. They respond to one of three different types of questions that we're going to go through here. And these questions help the speaker determine what form of argument and reasoning are necessary to support a specific purpose statement, right? So maybe you have an idea. Maybe I'd like to talk about Black Lives Matter. Maybe I'd like to talk about, volunteering with the homeless. Okay, how exactly am I going to compose and strategize and organize my speech? So let's go ahead and hop into one of the three different types of speeches. So the first one is a proposition of fact. This is whether you're going to hear what something that can be verified as true or false. This is research by Herrick in 2011. And he talks about this in his book on page 20. An example of a proposition of fact is global warming. So in theory, this can be verified as either true or false. Propositions of fact also deal with existence of particular phenomenon or causality. This is an example here is the cause of the economic downturn, right? And so, what exactly was the cause of the economic downturn? There's either, was there a war? Was there an algorithm that went bad? Was there a president that was um, killed, for example, right? So there are lots of different reasons that would be a cause of an economic downturn. And that type of speech would be considered a proposition of fact. And when advancing the propositions of fact, you want to focus on the evidence you can offer in support of your proposition, right? Including sufficient evidence, interpret the evidence, and emphasize relationship between the evidence and the proposition. And the example that they give in the book is Carmageddon in 2011. And so for those of us who lived here in Los Angeles and Southern California at that time, Carmageddon was when they decided to shut down the 405 freeway for 2 weekends in a row. And if you live here, you'll know that the 405 freeway is a major thoroughfare through the city of LA. There are 7 lanes in each direction. And over the weekend, there's always tons of traffic because it's how people get to and from the beach, to and from the shopping centers, and to and from the north and to the south of the city. So it's just a full freeway, almost 100% of the time. But they had to do some construction, and so they needed to shut it down for a certain number of hours, the whole freeway. And so what happened was for months, they tried to convince the people of the city, to not get on the freeway over these 2 weekends. And so people rearranged their social calendars. They decided that these weekends of Carmageddon, they were not going to go out. There were no parties, there were no weddings, there were no trips to the beach, etc. And so everybody decided to stay home. And it worked. I have to say that the city provided, as we say here, sufficient evidence. They interpret the evidence that, that in the past there's been tons of traffic. And if there's, if the freeway shut down, that the city's just going to be, total chaos. So they emphasize the relationship between what has happened in the past with traffic and the freeway, and the proposition that everybody should stay home over the weekend. Right now that we've been through a pandemic, it's not such a big concept to think about staying home. But in 2011, it was a really big idea. And it worked. The city was super successful. As I said, nobody went out. Nobody had their wedding over that weekend. And it encouraged people to stay off the freeway. And actually, nobody was out. It was like ghost town in Los Angeles. So the city was very, very successful. Again, that was a proposition of fact. Now we're going to talk about a proposition of value. This calls for a proposition judging the worth of something. It includes a claim regarding morality, aesthetics, wisdom, or desirability. An example is vegetarianism. And sometimes compares multiple options to determine which is best. So it's not necessarily one solution, but it might be 3 or 4 solutions. So if you're comparing the 10 best cars, you're saying that these 10 cars are the best out of the hundreds of cars that are made. You're propositioning someone, you're persuading them, but it's not necessarily one thing, but you're comparing them to other things. And the fourth solution here is the fourth qualifier for a proposition of value is it tends to be subjective. So it's important to establish evaluation criteria and offer evidence for evaluation. So the example that they give in the book here is keeping people on life support. If you're trying to convince people of that, you really need to establish exactly what is the criteria for sanctity of life, right? Is it eating? Is it breathing? Is it heart rate? Right? So there's lots of different things. It's somewhat subjective as to what qualifies someone as truly being alive. So these are propositions of value. And then the third type is a proposition of policy. Very often, if you're on a debate team, you would debate something that is qualifies as a policy. Here we want to ask the speaker to advocate for an appropriate course of action. You want to call for people to stop a behavior or start one. So the example here they give a policy is that they should have no plastic bags anymore in grocery stores, right? Because it hurts the environment and you should bring your own bag. Here, many speakers start with stating the status quo, identifying the problem. Speakers then identify the problem and offer a proposal for what we call a call to action. And finally, it's up to the speaker to demonstrate that it will have more benefits than costs. So here about these strategies, this first strategy, if you're talking about, if you have a topic that qualifies as proposition of fact or of value, you most likely want to use the strategy, the problem cause solution strategy. So you want to state your problem, you want to state the cause, and then you'll state your solutions. So if you're doing global warming, you'll say the problem is that, that we have more uh, smog, that we have trees that are dying, we have fish that are dying, and the cause is that we drive too many cars that have gasoline as the energy source. We, we burn down too many trees for the use of paper. We we have oil spills. So there's all the causes of environmental issues, and then the solution is right that we switch to electric cars, that we stop chopping down the trees, that we use plastic, we don't use plastic bags when we go to the grocery store. So you're going to state exactly what the problem is, exactly what the causes are, and then what the potential solutions are. If you have a proposition of policy, right? So this is, the sanctity of life issue. If you're arguing that that life stops when you can no longer breathe on your own, for example. Here you want to talk about what the problem is, then you talk about the solution, and then you'll have a visualization. So here you don't necessarily have to talk about the cause, you just have to talk about the solution. So here, maybe the problem is that we have too many people in the hospitals for years and years, wasting government money, keeping them alive when they really are brain dead or that their body doesn't function. And so the solution is that then we cut off the life support and we let them die naturally. And so the visualization then would be, let's imagine what it would look like if we had less and less people in the hospitals, how much money we would be saving, how much closure we would have for the families that were waiting for this person to either die or come back to life, etc. So walking through all these ideas and potential next steps in this proposition of policy. Right, so let's go ahead on to choosing a persuasive speech, and there are 5 steps to this persuasive speech topic. So do you want to decide precisely what you want to talk about? Right. So when you go out to research your topic, often you're going to get bombarded with research and information. So you're talking about global warming, for example. Maybe you just want to talk about the deforestation issue, or maybe you just want to talk about the oceans and the glaciers. So really narrow down exactly what you want to talk about and design your thesis and your purpose statement. Okay. And then we're going to talk about when you choose your persuasive speech topic, review whom you will be speaking, right? So are you going to be talking to an audience that knows a lot about your topic or not so much about your topic? So deciding then on your vocabulary and your data and the visual aids potentially that you'll be using. So again, if you're talking to an audience that knows a lot about global warming, then obviously you want to up the vocabulary, get a lot of research, get information that is going to be new and unique to them. If you're talking to an audience that knows nothing about global warming, then you want to make it a little more basic and elementary. Next, you want to identify to what ends you will hope the speech will lead, right? Do you want to have people actually go out and do something against global warming? Or you just want them to be aware of what it is and what the issues are. Persuasive speeches are often the result of some current issue. So, right, so very nice, a very good opportunity to take advantage of what's going on in the world today. So gas prices and the oil crisis in the Middle East, for example, Black Lives Matter is a good one. The COVID, the 2020 election. So lots of different topics that you can talk about of things that are happening today. And if you're still at a loss for a topic, maybe you can't think of something that you're passionate about, then Appendix A in the textbook has some really good topic ideas. Great. Let's talk about approaching audiences. So here, the first type of audience is called the receptive audience. This type of audience, and there are 3 different audiences that we typically see. So the first one is your receptive audience. They know something about your topic and they're generally supportive. You want to foster identification by highlighting things that you have in common. You want to offer a clear purpose statement and tell them that what you would like to have them do in response. And you would have them act on your message before you leave to reinforce the response. And this is researched by Babay in 2003. They're very well-known communications professors. And so when we talk about receptive audiences, right, this is, apple pie, what I talk about, like everybody loves apple pie, right? And so maybe you're talking to someone about helping the homeless situation, right? Nobody likes homeless people, right? So then here you're going to foster identification by highlighting things that you have in common. Say, right, like, don't you hate it when you're walking along the street and you have to step over a homeless person, right? Then you want to offer a clear statement of purpose and tell them what you'd like to do in a response. So today I'm going to talk to you about the homeless situation. And at the end of my speech, I would like you to give a donation for this organization that helps the homeless. And have them, again, the third point here, have them act on your message. So before you end your speech, you're going to give them a link to click on. You're going to give them send them a text. You're going to give them an envelope to write a check. So lots of different options here to work with your receptive audience. The next type of audience is a neutral audience, right? And so these are actually most groups. Let me go ahead and turn on the light. Hold on. It's getting a little dark in here. And so these are most groups that you talk to. They don't have a preference here or there. So your challenge here is to foster their interest in your proposition. And again, this is researched by Babay in 2003. You want to here begin by gaining their attention, offer a statistic or a story, so something really to grab them, because as I said, they're neutral. They are here and are there, so you want to really start with a bold introduction. And the other point here is that the audience may be more concerned about your topic or inclined to consider behavior change, consider offering resources for more information or steps for when they are ready. So it's not necessarily true that they are going to go through and follow through with a donation or signing up for a rally or giving you their attention or buying your book or whatever it might be at the end of your speech. But you're going to give them some options to join you in your idea. Great. And then the last type of audience is the hostile audience. And the goal here is to persuade the audience to listen to what you have to say, because you know from the start that they're not going to be interested, or they're going to be potentially resentful of your appearance. And this is again researched by Babay in 2003. So the strategy here is that once they're willing to listen, then you'll have the ability to change their minds. And here are some tips to get them to listen, right? First, you want to offer your opinion later in the speech. You don't want to tell them right away what your opinion is, because then they're going to start to think immediately about things that they can say against your idea. You want to open by highlighting issues on which you agree instead of a clear purpose statement. So you want to talk to them about things that you have in common. And you want to acknowledge their reservation and demonstrate that you have given them consideration. And so the example that I always like to talk about here, which I'll talk about later in this chapter again, is I had a student who gave a speech on why women should not be educated, right? And he gave that speech in 2020. And obviously that was not really a speech that people were willing to listen to, because nowadays, like, all women are educated equally as men as well as men. And I had a class that was split between men and women. And so what he did was he started by saying, that he grew up in an environment where he was raised by his mother and his aunts, and that he was came from his mother and his aunt came from India. And so he talked a little bit about, how maybe some other people in the audience are first generation Americans. So things that they can relate to. And other people in the audience potentially are also raised by their mothers and their aunts who stayed at home. And so he's creating a way for people to connect. And he doesn't tell them right away that he doesn't want women to be educated. Then he goes through his speech and he tells everybody how effective it is for children to be at home with their mothers all the time, and that it's so there all this research out there that that we learn less when we go to daycare, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure there's lots of research to support that. And then at the end of the speech, he says that women should not be educated because when they become educated, they go out to work and then they're not at home with the children. Right. And so then we're buying into his whole story, 90%, and then only the 10%, then we see what his true agenda is. But at that point, we've kind of already bought into his idea. So now we're going to somewhat consider his idea, right? If he had told us at the beginning of the speech that women should not be educated, we would have already started running with ideas as to, how to research information that would be against his idea. So good. So as I said, those were the 3 types of audience that you're going to hit upon. And so when you decide on your strategy, you can think about that. So now we're going to talk about ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos here is creating credibility by having good moral character, common sense, and concern for the audience's well-being. Again, by Babay in 2003. Impressions go a long way. You want to have confidence. So ethos is the ethical portion of your speaker credibility, right? So you want to demonstrate that you make good moral choices with regard to your relationship with the group. So you tell them that you have done lots of research. You tell them that you have their best interests in mind. You do have their best interests in mind, etc. So we don't want to be unethical when we give a persuasive speech. We also want to talk about here in this chapter logos. So creating what are called sound judgments. We want to make an assertion that requires a logical leap based on available evidence, as researched by Campbell and Huxman in 2009. So we're going to give them some research, and then we're going to create a conclusion based on that evidence. We also want to potentially give them a claim, a data, and a warrant. So a claim is an assertion, data is the evidence, and a warrant is the general connection. And so the example that they give in the book here are that gray clouds in the sky are linked to rain, right? And so here we're saying that the evidence is that there are gray clouds in the sky, and that the connection is that it's linked to rain, right? And so you want to make these connections in your logic. You also want to include in your logos elementary reasoning. This is backing that's necessary for your claim. So these are examples, statistics, testimony, etc. Everything that adds up to your credibility. The example that they give in the book is the color of the clouds is determined by how much light the water in the cloud is reflecting, right? So if the clouds are really dark, and gray clouds, that means that there's a lot of water and that there's definitely going to have some rain. But the clouds are like we have in Southern California. Most of the clouds here are really white and puffy and light. And that's the reason that we don't have a lot of rain. Good. So let's go ahead and hop into the elements of reasoning. They don't talk about pathos here quite yet. We're going to talk about pathos in another chapter. So the elements of reasoning here are inductively and deductively. And again, this is going to be evaluated and further explained in another chapter, but we want to briefly talk about that here. So inductively, we're talking about creating specific examples to a more general claim. So the example that they give in the book is a Yelp review. So when you have a Yelp review, you have specific examples. The food was bad, the service was bad, the place was dirty, et cetera, et cetera. Parking was awful. So these are specific examples to more general claim that the restaurant is awful. So here we consider if the instances are typical and or recent. So is it typical that the place is always dirty? Is it typical that the service is always bad? And maybe the service was bad in 2006. Maybe that's not relevant today. So you're looking at all of these things that funnel down into a conclusion. That's what inductive reasoning is all about. And then the other type of reasoning, which is more common, is deductive reasoning. So we're moving from a general principle to a specific one, also known as a syllogism. It begins with a major premise, moves to a minor one, and then concludes with a specific one. So here we talk about all dogs bark. Neighbor has a dog, conclude that your neighbor's dog barks, right? It's not necessarily true, right? There are other factors that go into this. So maybe maybe the dog only barks when the mailman comes. Maybe the dog only barks when the owner isn't home. So there's lots of, general principles, and we're looking for a conclusion. But this is what it's called deductive reasoning. And again, I said we'll go through that further in chapter 6. Oh, and then there's also causal reasoning. This examines related events to determine which one caused the other. So an example here is where oil spill kills many species. So that's like a cause and effect. Great. Okay, here we go. So pathos. Here we're going to talk about drawing on emotions, sympathies, and prejudices of the audience to appeal to their non-rational side. So I think of this as the heart technique, right? So you're appealing to their emotions. Again, researched by one of my favorite researchers, Babay in 2003. This route can be vital to persuading them, researched by Dillard and Meisgenders in 2002. So you'll see that when we listen to each other's speeches here in this course, more than likely we'll have pathos in each of your different speeches, because it's really vital and important to persuading someone is appealing to their emotions. And you want to use clear examples that illustrate your point, verbal, non-verbal, and visual, right? So you want to, if you're talking about your dog, you want to talk about how cute your dog is, or how sweet your dog is, or how you found your dog. So all these different things that potentially appeal to your emotions. Let's move into the ethics of persuasion. Here we're talking about how we want to avoid coercion, right? Thoughts or behaviors are altered. It's deceptive or harmful. Harmful methods propel the intended changes, not reason, right? So these can rise in physical or emotional harm. And the example that they give in the book is getting prisoners of war to talk and share secrets via torture. So that's what is known as coercion, right? So we want to shy away from anything like this, right? We want to honestly persuade people through a logical and ethical way. And we also want to avoid any fallacies. These are disruptions in logic, so or errors in reasoning. The strategy to help avoid fallacy is to be transparent in your goal. So don't try and hide anything. Okay, now we're going to talk about organizing the persuasive speeches. One of the ways to organize a persuasive speech is the Monroe's motivated sequence. And this is the organizational pattern that attempts to convince the audience to respond to a need that is delineated in this speech. This was created by Monroe in 1949, and there's a really nice figure in the book in figure 16.1. We'll go through the ideas here. So the first part of the Monroe's motivated sequence is the attention step. So getting the audience's attention, right? And so that's done through humor, through telling a story, through a statistic, etc. Then you're going to tell them a need step, providing the description of the problem and the consequences. Then you're going to talk to them about a satisfaction step, outlining your solution to the problem and dealing with the objection. So problem solution. And then there you have the visualization step. So this is, I briefly outlined this earlier, right? Problem solution visualization, asking the audience to visualize what will happen if the solution if the solutions are implemented, and if they are not, they need to be rich in detail. And lastly, an action appeal. Monroe's motivated sequence wants you to make a direct appeal for action on how the audience needs to react. Then we have the direct method pattern. The goal here is to adopt a particular idea. Consists of a claim and a list of reasons to support it. Every piece of support directly supports the essential claim that you wish to make. And this is good for listeners when they're apathetic or neutral, as researched by Jaffe in 2004 on page 329. And the example here is vegetarianism, right? So a claim that we should not eat meat and listen reasons to support that, whether that be animal cruelty or, it's not good for your body, or it's too expensive to eat meat, etc. So a list of reasons and then claims to support that. Good. And so now we're going to walk into the causal pattern. First, really addresses some cause and then shares what effects are resulted. So again, a cause, the causes, and then the effects. This is effective when used to convince audience of the relationship between two things. It's used to convince audience of something that they were previously opposed to believing. So potentially with an audience that's more hostile. And then some examples are sharing the results of a new program. So if you're implementing a new software, or discussing how one act led to another, or discussing the positive points of a topic. The general cause and specific effect, again, of your topic. Okay, so as you can see, persuasive speaking is somewhat creative, right? Because there are all these different ways to organize your speech. The last technique that we're going to talk about here today is the refutation pattern. This is used when the audience is already opposed to the argument. Again, I'm going to use that example of how girls should not be educated, right? It's used to persuade that your side is better or more accurate. You want to bring attention to the conflict and refute it with evidential support. Another example are debates, right? When people debate a policy or an idea, it's important to highlight the importance of the debate, like why exactly are we debating this? And that there are 4 steps. You want to first signal the argument to which you're responding, state your own argument, provide justification, and then summarize your response, right? And so in the example of girls should not be educated, we want to after my student, tells them what exactly his idea is, he wants to, tell them that, okay, I don't want women to be educated. I want to, I justify this because, that it's better when children are raised by their mothers in the home. And then I want to summarize my response at the end of my speech. Okay, and so that brings us to the end of chapter 16, Persuasive Speaking. Again, I'm Professor Green. Thank you so much for sticking with me. This is a really meatful topic, no play on words with vegetarianism, but there's a lot of meat in this topic, and it's really interesting to go through this and understand not only how to deliver persuasive speech, but also how to listen to persuasive speeches and make sure that we are listening critically and paying attention. So again, thank you so much for listening. This is chapter 16 from the Public Speaking Project.